On June 14, 1940, the streets of Paris trembled under the march of the Nazi army. Uniformed soldiers paraded triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées, their banners fluttering ominously in the spring breeze, while the city's residents watched in stunned silence, many too fearful to even breathe. Among the onlookers, a young Jewish mother named Sara Hauptman stood on the crowded sidewalk, shaking her fist defiantly at the invaders, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear, outrage, and disbelief. At just 21 years old, she could not have known that this moment, fleeting yet charged with history, would be the beginning of a harrowing 5-year odyssey of danger, loss, and unimaginable courage. Over the next half-decade, Sara would confront the occupying Nazi forces time and again, first in France and then in her native Belgium, facing situations that would test her resilience, ingenuity, and humanity. Her life would transform in ways she could never have imagined, from a young woman struggling with the responsibilities of early motherhood to a fearless agent of the Belgian resistance, orchestrating the perilous rescue of downed American airmen while risking her own life with every passing day. Sara Hauptman was born on August 15, 1918, in the small Polish town of Laskazu, a place where the shadows of anti-Jewish sentiment often lurked in the alleys and market squares. Her parents, anticipating the worsening conditions for Jews in Poland, fled when she was just an infant, seeking the relative safety and religious tolerance of Belgium. Her father, Gedalia Hauptman, a man of quiet determination, opened a small epicure, a modest fruit and vegetable store that became the heart of the family's livelihood. Sara grew up in a household that was lively, chaotic, and often overwhelming, with 8 brothers and eventually 2 sisters. For the first 16 years of her life, she was the only girl among the siblings, a position that shaped her personality and instincts. She learned to be tough, outspoken, and fiercely independent, qualities that earned her the nickname Tomboy within the family and helped her navigate the rough-and-tumble world of her brother's games, disputes, and adventures. From an early age, Sara developed the ability to defend herself, whether physically or with sheer determination, skills that would prove invaluable in the years to come. As a teenager, Sara's interests turned toward nursing, and she trained diligently to care for the sick and wounded, embracing a sense of purpose and compassion. Yet life's hardships were never far away. In 1936, tragedy struck when her father succumbed to prostate cancer, leaving the family not only grieving but also financially destitute. The loss weighed heavily on Sara, who felt both the responsibilities of her large family and the sting of vulnerability in a world growing increasingly hostile to Jews. It was during this turbulent period that she met Nathan Hauptman, a skilled tailor and a friend of her older brother. Against her mother's wishes, and in defiance of the family's precarious circumstances, Sara eloped with Nathan in 1938, leaving behind the familiarity of her childhood home to start a new life in Antwerp. 9 months later, on April 20, 1939, Sara gave birth to their first child, a son named Guy, unwittingly sharing a birthday with Adolf Hitler, a dark coincidence that seemed almost portentous given the tumultuous times ahead. The Hauptmans were acutely aware of the gathering storm of Nazism and the threat it posed to Jews across Europe. Yet poverty, restrictive immigration quotas, and the rapid disintegration of European stability left them trapped, unable to flee the continent even as the clouds of war gathered ominously. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, forcing the Polish government into exile in Paris, the reverberations were felt far beyond the front lines. Polish officials began sending draft notices to their citizens living elsewhere in Europe. Nathan, still technically a Polish citizen despite living in Belgium since adolescence, received his notice and departed for Paris to fulfill his obligations. Sara, determined not to be separated from her husband, followed shortly afterward, carrying their 4.5-month-old son, for bottles of milk, and a single suitcase containing the few possessions they could afford to bring. She presented Nathan's letter to the train conductor, who reluctantly allowed her passage, and she began a journey that would place her in the direct path of the advancing German war machine. Within months, Germany launched its blitzkrieg into Belgium and France on May 10, 1940, and the resistance of the Belgian army crumbled within days. 18 days later, Belgium capitulated under the overwhelming force of Nazi occupation, leaving civilians to navigate a new reality of fear, oppression, and uncertainty. The Polish forces scattered, and Nathan, recognizing the futility of allegiance to a nation that had historically persecuted his family, deserted the army. His primary concern became the survival of his wife and infant son in a Europe increasingly dominated by an enemy whose cruelty was well known. The reunited family tried desperately to plan a return to Brussels, clinging to hope even as the world around them descended into chaos. And then, on that fateful day in mid-June 1940, the inevitable happened. The Nazis entered Paris, their march a stark symbol of conquest and terror. For Sara, the sight of the invaders sweeping through the city was both horrifying and galvanizing. It marked the beginning of a period in which ordinary acts of survival would demand extraordinary courage. Little did she know that the very traits cultivated during her childhood, her fearlessness, quick thinking, and unwavering determination, would soon place her in the heart of resistance networks, where she would navigate treacherous terrain, forge alliances with strangers, and orchestrate life-saving operations for Allied soldiers. The life of Sara Hauptman, once that of a young mother and nurse in training, was now inexorably entwined with the fate of Europe itself, a journey that would test the limits of human endurance and the power of courage against tyranny. Sara Hauptman's life under Nazi occupation became a relentless struggle for survival, one in which each day carried the weight of fear, uncertainty, and impossible choices. Fearing that the Nazis would uncover her husband Nathan's ties to the Polish army and arrest him, the young couple took the difficult step of leaving their infant son Guy in the care of a French farmer's wife on the outskirts of Paris, believing he would be safer there than in their own apartment in the city. Yet, even as she tried to hold on to hope, Sara's worst fears materialized 7 months later, in late January 1941. Alone in their Parisian apartment while Nathan attempted to arrange clandestine transport back to Brussels, she heard the unmistakable thudding of boots echoing through the hallway. Her heart raced as the sounds grew louder, stopping just outside her door. Panic gripped her. Had the Nazis discovered she was Jewish, or had they learned of Nathan's military past? Any hope of escape evaporated as the door was flung open, revealing an SS officer's black uniform filling the doorway. The officer brushed her aside and commanded his men to ransack the apartment. They arrested her over a seemingly trivial discovery, a collection of men's suits, which, as the wife of a tailor, she naturally possessed. Sara refused to betray Nathan, insisting the suits had already been in the apartment when she rented it, but her story began to unravel when they found men's underwear in a dresser. Taken to a prison on the outskirts of Paris, Sara learned that the Nazis suspected her of aiding German deserters with civilian clothing. She spent 8 months behind bars, enduring the isolation and fear of uncertainty, until the Nazis released her without explanation. During her incarceration, Nathan had retrieved their son from the farmer's wife and maneuvered a clandestine route back to Brussels, prioritizing the child's safety while unable to aid his wife. Once freed, Sara relied on friends willing to risk everything to help her cross the French-Belgian border. After bribing a guard, she stepped into Belgium, uncertain if she would find safety or walk into a Nazi trap. The reunion with Nathan brought a fragile sense of relief, and for a brief moment, she imagined the possibility of returning to a semblance of normal life. But the cruelty of the occupation was far from over. When she applied for identity papers, her Jewish heritage was revealed, and she was marked with the word Jewif, signaling that, in the eyes of the Nazis, her life was considered not worthy of life. Decrees against Jews grew more severe by the week, culminating in May 1942 with the imposition of the Star of David to be worn on all clothing. Nathan lost his job when the Nazis shuttered his cousin's tailor shop, and Sara discovered she was pregnant again, further complicating their perilous existence. To protect their son, they entrusted Guy to Sara's former nanny, Catherine, who lived in a small ranching community outside Brussels, where he could pass as a Gentile among the villagers. Tragedy struck on July 2, 1942, when the Nazis arrested Sara's mother and younger brother Albert while they were shopping at a local grocery store. To safeguard her remaining siblings, Sara hid them with Catholic nuns and priests. Soon after, she and Nathan were forced into separate hiding places, finding shelter in basements, cellars, and cold attics, spaces that were more prison than refuge, yet safer than the streets they once walked freely. Sara's pregnancy made survival even more precarious, as not everyone was willing to harbor a woman expecting a child. Eventually, she found refuge with a woman named Sophie. When labor began, Sara prayed fervently that a Nazi patrol would not intercept them en route to the hospital, knowing that her Jewish identity papers could seal her fate. 8 days after giving birth to their daughter Monique, fate struck again. The Nazis arrested Nathan on the steps of the hospital and sent him to Malines, a camp near Mechelen, leaving Sara to care for her newborn alone. Months later, when the Nazis searched Sophie's house, Sara hid in the basement, pressing her infant daughter's hand over her mouth to muffle her cries. Upstairs, Sophie demonstrated her loyalty in the only way she could, showing a photograph of Hitler hidden behind a family picture to convince the soldiers of her allegiance. In the cruel calculus of occupied Europe, Sara and her family learned that survival required constant vigilance, resourcefulness, and the courage to defy the forces that sought to destroy them. Sara Hauptman's life in hiding took on a new perilous dimension as she navigated the underground resistance in Brussels, constantly balancing fear, responsibility, and courage. Unable to obtain any news of her husband, mother, or brother, she focused on rescuing another sibling, Simon, by reaching out to the clandestine networks operating under the noses of the Nazis. Her efforts led her to St. Gilles, a quiet suburb southwest of Brussels, where at the courthouse she was granted a secret meeting with Jean-Marie Mortgat, the chief of police and a covert leader of the resistance in the area. Mortgat, having meticulously checked Sara's background, agreed to assist her brother's escape to Sweden, but that same day he enlisted Sara into the resistance herself. She was assigned to the courthouse basement, where her delicate hands and keen intellect were put to use forging identity papers. Taking the documents of deceased individuals, she altered birth dates and details, providing countless refugees with a lifeline through the oppressive Nazi system. At only 4 feet, 11 inches tall, Sara's small frame became an asset. She learned to disguise herself as a boy, binding her chest, tucking her hair under a cap, and blending seamlessly into the shadows. One of her daily tasks involved emptying the waste containers from jail cells, retrieving last messages from captured resistance members, and passing them along to Mortgat, ensuring critical information moved through the underground network. Her work eventually brought her into contact with Maurice Gilbert, a former Belgian Supreme Court justice who sheltered downed Allied flyers in his attic outside Brussels. Sara would transport forged papers to Gilbert, sometimes concealing them in clever pockets or even carrying recovered parachutes on her bicycle past patrolling German soldiers, the bundles strapped to her back like mundane laundry, all the while knowing discovery meant certain death. Mortgat, revered by the people of St. Gilles, worked tirelessly despite the stakes. If his activities were discovered, his wife and young son Robert would face unimaginable consequences. Codenamed Cupid in the underground, Mordgat embodied a rare combination of meticulous bravery and selfless devotion, traits that inspired Sara even as fear gnawed at her constantly. One of Sara's most dangerous missions involved acting as a lookout for a saboteur targeting a Nazi-occupied building. Standing on the quiet street, whistle hidden beneath her blouse, she waited for the signal to warn the bomber of approaching soldiers. The saboteur, clad in a black leather jacket, deftly tossed a grenade into the basement window before disappearing down a narrow alley, while Sara dashed to her hidden bicycle and zigzagged away as the blast tore through the building, killing 12 Nazis. The reprisal was swift and merciless. That same day, 12 innocent Belgians were pulled from the streets and executed. Overcome with guilt, Sara blamed herself for their deaths, though Mordgat reassured her that the Nazis' brutality required no provocation and that she had merely carried out a necessary assignment. The terror persisted the following day when 3 Nazi soldiers arrived at the courthouse. Hands shaking, Sara tried to continue filing papers, her co-workers shielding her trembling movements from the soldiers' view. Incredibly, the Nazis departed without noticing her, leaving her to continue her dangerous, nerve-wracking work, each day a delicate balance between life, death, and the moral weight of choices made under fire. Seeking a change from the constant tension and claustrophobia of the courthouse basement, Sara Hauptman requested a new assignment from the underground, and they found her a position that seemed almost surreal given the dangers of her life: an usher at the Cirque Royale, the grand entertainment arena in downtown Brussels. While officially her duties involved nothing more than seating patrons and managing the rental of folding chairs, reclaiming them if someone left their seat and charging them again upon return, her off-duty hours were anything but ordinary, as she continued to courier messages and documents for the resistance, moving covertly through a world that existed just above the shadow of Nazi control. The German soldiers who frequented the arena quickly noticed her petite frame and sharp, defiant eyes, dubbing her the Little Devil, or Klein Teufel, and turned her daily chores into a dangerous game of flirtation. Each encounter felt like a tightrope walk. The soldiers' innuendos and persistent advances sickened her, and the subtle threat lurking behind their smiles reminded her that every interaction carried potential peril. Desperate to escape the unnerving attention, Sara heard about an opening with the circus troupe performing at the Cirque Royale and eagerly accepted a chance to train as a lion tamer, a role that seemed both extraordinary and terrifying. 6 weeks of intense preparation later, she emerged as the childlike lion tamer, performing in the center ring with lions and tigers leaping through flaming hoops, pawing at her, and occasionally allowing her to place her head within a predator's jaws, a feat that demonstrated trust she had earned but also demanded nerves of steel. The ringmaster, Leonard, captured these daring moments, and Sara even nurtured a lion cub born to Mitzi, a female lion she had tamed, integrating the cub into the act with Mitzi carrying it through the ring as if it were a natural part of the performance. Amid the spectacle of roaring beasts and the theater of circus lights, Sara's life remained intertwined with peril beyond the arena. She continued her underground work, navigating the city's dangers with intelligence and bravery. Mordgat, ever aware of the risks, had provided her with cyanide pills to carry in case of capture, a grim reminder of the ever-present threat, but Sara, fearing that her children might accidentally find them while visiting their nanny, flushed them down the toilet, choosing instead to rely on her wits, her courage, and her ability to talk her way out of situations, fully aware that any misstep could mean death. Standing in the spotlight each night, commanding the respect and awe of the big cats and the audience alike, Sara balanced a double life of daring entertainment and life-threatening espionage, knowing that the roar of the lions in the ring was far more predictable than the unpredictable cruelty of the Nazis lurking outside. Sara Hauptman's courage and quick thinking saved her on more than one occasion, most vividly during a close call on a crowded Brussels tram. Despite having dyed her hair blonde, a Jewish man recognized her and, in a desperate attempt to save himself from arrest, denounced her to the authorities. In that moment of imminent danger, Sara's training as a natural actress and her fluency in German became her lifeline. With calculated charm, she flirted with a German soldier while speaking flawless German, offering him complimentary tickets to the circus where she worked. The soldier, captivated by her audacity, turned on the man who had betrayed her, throwing him off the tram and arresting him instead. Yet, despite her clever evasions and careful concealment of her underground activities, fate eventually caught up with her. On a Tuesday afternoon in July 1944, Sara returned to her former apartment and was stunned to see her brother Simon, recently returned from hiding in Sweden. Simon explained that the Swedish woman who had sheltered him had made repeated unwanted advances, and homesickness and love for his girlfriend had driven him back. Sara attempted to persuade him to leave immediately, but their conversation lingered too long. Sirens blared, announcing the arrival of Gestapo agents. The door was broken open, and Simon was beaten mercilessly as he pleaded that he was Belgian, showing the Gentile papers Sara had painstakingly forged for him. The Nazis called him a Jew and knocked out his front teeth, ignoring Sara's frantic protests that he was not Jewish. Blood covered the floor, the chair, and her dress, and Simon passed out under the relentless blows. Resigned, Sara finally declared that they were Jewish, choosing to protect her brother from certain death even if it meant the work camps awaited them. Both were sent to Malines, the same camp where Nathan had been imprisoned, and for weeks they endured the uncertainty and brutality of camp life until Sara saw her forged name, Suramiah Downick, listed on transport number 26, scheduled to depart on July 31, 1944. Simon insisted on accompanying her, even though his name was not included. The transport to Poland was a nightmarish ordeal. Malicious guards with bayonets herded prisoners into cramped cattle cars for a 3-day journey without water, food, or sanitation. The searing heat and untreated injuries claimed lives along the way, yet Sara survived alongside 19 other Belgian women, who were directed to the showers rather than the gas chambers. According to the Auschwitz Chronicles, 563 Jews from Malines were sent on the 26th RHSA transport, yet only a fraction survived the initial selection. 202 people, including 47 children, were murdered immediately. Sara's humanity was stripped as she received a number tattooed on her arm, a 24130, erasing her identity and reducing her to a statistic in the Nazi machinery of death. At Auschwitz, she endured almost 3 months of unimaginable cruelty. Kapos, Jewish prisoners who cooperated with the Nazis in exchange for privileges, punished her for resisting their authority, including kneeling on razor-sharp rocks while holding bricks in her hands to avoid death. She imagined her children weighing down her arms, fueling her determination to survive each agonizing moment. Sara and her friend Frida were later subjected to horrifying experiments conducted by Joseph Mengele, enduring chemical insertions that caused unbearable pain and swelling, raising fears of forced sterilization or impregnation with monstrosities. Only time and survival proved otherwise, and Sara later reflected with relief that she had borne her children before the war, acknowledging that afterward, she would never be able to have any. In the midst of Auschwitz's horrors, every breath, every act of defiance, every heartbeat was a testament to Sara's extraordinary will to survive for herself, for her children, and for the life that the Nazis sought to annihilate. Sara Hauptman's ordeal continued even after Auschwitz, as she was informed by a Belgian capo she had known in Brussels that her beloved husband, Nathan, had been seen at the camp, emaciated and weighing less than 80 pounds, sent to the gas chamber but miraculously spared, news that pushed Sara to the brink of despair. For a moment, she considered ending her life, touching the electrified wires that could deliver a final merciful escape, yet the thought of her children, left orphaned, anchored her will to survive. Through the capo's intervention, she was transported to Dachau in October 1944, along with other surviving Belgian women, enduring yet another harrowing journey in overcrowded cattle cars, bracing herself for whatever horrors might await. On October 27th, Sara arrived at Kaufering, one of Dachau's 36 subcamps, and was assigned to the Fixkommando, a grueling unit tasked with repairing train tracks destroyed by Allied bombers during the day so they could be sabotaged again the next night. Within days, a small act of humanity, sharing her meager soup with a starving teenager, resulted in brutal punishment. German guards forced the capos to whip her on the horse, delivering 25 lashes that left her unconscious and her back gaping with wounds. Despite the agony, she returned to work, meeting a German farmer, Heinz, who secretly offered her a chance to escape. She refused, understanding that any escape would imperil the entire group. Even as the Allies gained ground and their proximity became evident, the prisoners lived in constant vigilance until the day they could no longer restrain their curiosity. Venturing from the barracks, Sara discovered the Germans had fled, and the sight of American flags prompted jubilation, though tragically some prisoners, unaware the electrified wires were still live, were electrocuted amidst the celebrations. In the liberation that followed, American soldiers, unable to speak the languages of the inmates, relied on sign language and improvised communication. Joy and chaos mingled as skeletal prisoners were given rich food too quickly, resulting in deaths despite the soldiers' compassion. Sara, trained as a nurse, immediately pitched in at the Landsberg infirmary, tending to those weakened by typhus and starvation. When General Dwight D. Eisenhower toured the camp, Sara recognized his dilemma in communicating with the prisoners and stepped forward as translator, liaising between the liberated inmates and the Allied forces, providing crucial reports on conditions in the infirmary, and ultimately earning the general's personal invitation to visit the United States. Amid the whirlwind of liberation, a miracle occurred. In the Landsberg hospital, Sara found Nathan alive. Both fainted at the sight of each other, a reunion made possible because a Polish guard, having known Nathan's generous father, had ensured his survival and transfer to Dachau. Though Sara had suffered unimaginable loss, the death of her mother and 3 brothers, including Albert, Jean, and Simon, her younger siblings had survived, immigrating to Canada or joining Zionist forces to fight for Israel's independence. After reuniting with their 2 children, Sara and Nathan immigrated to the United States in 1951, settling first in El Paso, Texas, and 5 years later becoming U.S. citizens. Eventually, they moved to Colorado Springs, where they lived together for more than 3 decades. Sara Hauptman, a woman whose courage, ingenuity, and indomitable spirit had carried her through the darkest chapters of human history, passed away in December 2014 at the age of 96, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, survival, and the triumph of love and family against the unthinkable horrors of the Holocaust.